Good morning, everyone, and those who are joining us online. Welcome to the second session on the ROK-Japan Cooperation on the Joint Development Zone. My name is Ellen Kim, Senior Fellow with the Korea Chair here at CSIS. Today, we are going to talk about this bilateral agreement between Korea, South Korea, and Japan, signed in 1978, to jointly explore and develop a Block 7 underwater shelf in East China Sea, a region that is known to have some substantial deposits of oil and other natural gases. This agreement has not been very well known to the general public, but this is going to be quite an important issue between Korea and Japan, as it's going to be set to expire in 2028, which with a 3-year advance notice, meaning that this agreement can expire. Japan or Korea can terminate this agreement as early as this year. So before we dive into this discussion and what this means for bilateral energy cooperation between Korea and Japan, I would like to introduce our 3 very special speakers on the stage. Personally, I'm very glad that they are here with us today because I could not think of anyone better who can talk about this issue. So first on my left, Congressman Ami Bera. Congressman Ami Bera has been serving as a member of the United States House Representative from Sacramento County, California since 2013. Representative Bera is currently a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he served as a ranking member of the Subcommittee on East Asia and Pacific. He is also a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and also the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. Congressman Bera is also a member of the New Democratic Coalition, a group of over 100 forward-thinking Democrats who are committed to pro-economic growth, pro-innovation, and fiscally responsible policies. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next is Professor Seta Makoto, who is an associate professor at the Graduate School of Waseda University, specializing in international law and the law of the sea. On his next, last but not least, is Dr. Song Hee-go, who is the Director General for Cadastral Resurvey Planning at Korea's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport. He's also former assistant director at the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Fishery, where he initiated Korea's Ocean Strategy 2030. He is also adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Public Administration, Yonsei University. Thank you both for traveling all the way from Korea and Japan and joining us today. I have a lot of things to talk about this agreement, but because we don't have a lot of time, I will just go straight into questions. And maybe I'll start with Congressman Bera. Many of us know that you are one of the very leading vocal support of the U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral Cooperation. But since the very successful summit, Camp David summit last year, the political environment in 3 countries have changed dramatically. And tomorrow, I believe that Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru is visiting U.S. to have the first summit meeting with the President Trump. So I would like to ask your perspective on the current state of play in U.S. ROK-Japan Trilateral Cooperation and what is likely to happen under Trump administration in general. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. It's hard to predict what's going to happen under the Trump administration because it changes minute by minute, hour by hour. I do think, so let's just look back on the last 4 years where the Biden administration left things. And also with Japan and Korea, I think all 3 administrations made a concerted effort to build a strong trilateral relationship that, as you said, culminated with Camp David. Compared to where the relationship was in the first Trump term, it was 180 degrees, night and day. Obviously, the bilateral relationship between Korea and Japan 8 years ago was in a very difficult place. Fast forward to where it is today, I think, and I'll give President Yoon credit for intentionally saying, we need to get this relationship, and Prime Minister Kishida as well, both paid some political price in this way, but also the Biden administration early on put an emphasis on getting the trilateral to a strong place. So that's where it has been. Politics, as you noted, have changed in all three countries. Obviously, we're still trying to figure out where President Trump's focus will be when it comes to East Asia. Obviously, a new administration coming into power in Japan, and we're watching Korean politics being very interesting. So let's set aside the executive branch, the leaders. From the legislative side, we've maintained ongoing dialogue with the members of the Diet as well as the National Assembly. And we do think from the legislative perspective, we have been working in a very intentional way to introduce legislation to create a trilateral legislative dialogue. We have some of these formal mechanisms in the transatlantic relationship, but this would be a first, for the United States, for Congress, the Diet, and the National Assembly on a regular annual basis to meet. We think this is important because as we're watching unfold, presidents do change, administrations in Japan and Korea change, but the members of Congress, members of the Diet, members of the National Assembly are often there for a long time. And if we can have that ongoing dialogue, we're a separate branch of government, then we can continue to make progress so it doesn't constantly change.
That sounds like another institutionalization of the U.S. ROK-Japan in the legislative side.
Exactly.
Very nice. Okay, I'd like to ask Professor Makoto, Seta Makoto. So specifically going into this agreement between Korea and Japan, what does this agreement mean for you, for Japan? Given your legal expertise, could you explain this agreement a little bit more, since from a historical and legal perspective, because not many of us know really about what this is. So,
okay, so may I share my slide? Okay, yep. So I want to explain by using this slide. So the right hand is some kind of issues about this kind of bilateral agreement. So the bilateral agreement was adopted in 1974. And actually, there are multiple reasons why the agreement was adopted in this year. So one of the reasons is that after World War II, okay, so the regime of continental shelf has developed, and the two states consider that so they can possess the continental shelf. And in 1972, as you know, so Japan and the United States officially recognized People's Republic of China as a sole Chinese representative. And so due to such kind of a political change, and both ROK and Japan consider that it's essential for the two states to jointly develop the natural resources, oil and gas, so in the East China Sea. And also that the UN published a report in 1969, which said that there is a huge amount of oil and gas in the East China Sea. So because of those reasons, so the two states successfully agreed to make a joint development agreement. And actually in that era, in that year, another agreement was also concluded. So that is the Northern Continental Shelf Agreement. Actually, it made a delimitation line between Japan and ROK partially. Actually, it's a very short line, but so Japan and ROK successfully made a delimitation. And so this SCS it means not South China Sea, it means the Southern Continental Shelf Agreement. So it's successfully established the Joint Development Agreement Zone, so as is written here. And before talking about when I explain the reason why this part, so the Joint Development Agreement Zone was established, so I needed to explain the kind of would you start again? So I need to talk about brief history of the development of the regime of continental shelf. Okay, so 1945, so U.S. President Truman made a declaration, a so-called Truman Declaration, which tried to make the continental shelf subject to U.S. Sovereignty, U.S. rights authority. But so actually, it's a kind of a unilateral action by United States, but many states follow that U.S. action. And finally, international community successfully adopted the Continental Shelf Convention on Continental Shelf. So that was the kind of a universal regime for the continental shelf. And based on that agreement, the continental shelf can be delimited based on the distance. So equidistance is one of the, the sole principle to make a delimitation under the Continental Shelf Convention. But many states were frustrated with that methodology, and the Western Germany is one of them, was one of them. So in the North Sea Continental Shelf case before ICJ, so the Western Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark were the party to the dispute, and the Western Germany claimed that the equidistance is not equal, doesn't lead to the equitable solution, and the more natural prolongation should be respected. So that was the argument by Western Germany. And finally, ICJ adopted the argument by Western Germany. So we can say that after the result of the North Sea Continental Shelf by the ICJ, so the method of delimitation of a continental shelf is natural prolongation. And I want to emphasize the fact that the SGS agreement was adopted not just after, but so 5 years later. But so this means that the impact of the North Sea Continental Shelf was really strong at that time. So actually, when I checked the debates within the Japanese Parliament, so the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs explained that according to the jurisprudence of the ICJ, so the delimitation line should be drawn like this or that. So I can say that the impact of this judgment was quite strong. And going back to this map, so this is the kind of a joint development zone between Japan and Republic of Korea. And this is the line of the delimitation between Japan and Republic of Korea. So Northern Continental Shelf Agreement. And so this is the SGS agreement designate the joint development zone. And this dotted line is a median line, so kind of equidistance between Japanese island and the Korean island, right? So, and this is some kind of edge of the natural prolongation of the South Korea. So this means that only from the median line to the Japanese side, this joint development zone was established. And the reason is because of the effect of the North Sea Continental Shelf case. So distance is not vital. So at least according to the North Sea Continental Shelf case, distance is not vital. So natural prolongation, the feature of the seabed is more important. So this is what ICJ said. And so Japanese government accepted that argument. And as a result, the Japan and Republic of Korea agreed to make a joint development agreement zone here. Sorry, but I made a same mistake. I'm sorry, terribly sorry. And but after that, so the ICJ also, first of all, the UNCLOS, UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, was adopted in 1982. And it dramatically changed the regime of continental shelf. So first, it changed the definition of continental shelf itself. So as a result, the method for the delimitation was also changed. And the reason, one of the reasons is that the introduction of the exclusive economic zone. So before UNCLOS was adopted, so the states couldn't possess EEZ. But after the result of the adoption of UNCLOS, so the states may lawfully claim the EEZ. And EEZ is can be measured from the baseline to the 200 nautical miles, as you know. So this means that EEZ is based on the distance from the land, right? So, and the continental shelf is basically the kind of a seabed of the EEZ. And so same methodology for the delimitation should be adopted. And as a result, so the delimitation methodology for the continental shelf, also going back to the distance, and especially in the case between Libya and Malta, so before the ICJ. So ICJ emphasized the distance, the importance of the distance. So based on the distance, delimitation should be drawn. So, so this is what the ICJ said. And with regard to the CSIS agreement, so actually, so this agreement was adopted as a kind of a result of the compromise. If states make some kind of a delimitation, agreed for the delimitation line, so states do not need to make a joint development zone. So because, okay, so this is South Korea, this part is Japan, and so they can unilaterally develop their own resources, right? But they couldn't agree the delimitation line, so that is the reason why they alternatively made a joint development zone. And in order to make a development, so the function of concessionaires are very important. So both governments, so ROK government and Japanese government, designate the concessionaire, each concessionaire. And so they have some kind of a strong authority to decide how to conduct the joint development. But unfortunately, after 2010, so Japanese government hasn't designated as any concessionaire. So because of the kind of a conclusion by the Japanese side that there is not much enough resources for development, which is commercially feasible. So from a Japanese perspective, so there is, if they kind of invest the money for the development of that East China Sea, the joint development zone between Japan and South Korea, so they cannot get any profit. Especially the private company wouldn't like to join the project. So Japanese government hasn't designated as a concessionaire since 2010. And it continues so, by now. So this is a kind of a current situation. And the last year, so South Korea, as far as I understand, probably South Korea strongly claimed that so we should try to proceed the joint development project. And as far as I understand, so Japanese newspaper said that actually, so the SGS agreement also established some kind of a joint committee, and the joint committee is supposed to be held annually. But 39 years, so there were no joint committees. So this means that so Japanese government almost gave up, and so they couldn't successfully hold the joint committees for 39 years. But last year, so they successfully held the committee. So something would proceed. But the problem is that I'm not sure whether I can say the problem, but the thing is that so we have some kind of a deadline. So because it's the SGS agreement enters into force for 50 years, and it started from the 1978. So this means that okay, as Ellen already explained, that 2028 it would be so one of the party can unilaterally terminate the agreement. And but 3 years before the termination, each state must notify it. So that means that okay, so from this year, so one of the party can notify that okay, I will terminate the agreement unilaterally. So this is the current situation of the SGS agreement, and also I want to add one point for the kind of a development of the continental shelf regime, so by the ICJ. So last year, ICJ held the judgment case, decision between a case concerning the maritime delimitation between Nicaragua and Colombia. And in that case, ICJ said that so the entitlement of a continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles over the one state is if it encroaches into the other states' areas beyond within 200 nautical miles. So the former states cannot have entitlement for the latter's continental shelf. So this is what ICJ said. So if we follow the judgment of the ICJ last year, so this part, so this is a line of the 200 nautical miles from the South Korea. So beyond 200 nautical miles from South Korea and within 200 nautical miles from Japan. So this area, according to the ICJ, South Korea wouldn't have any entitlement. And the kind of a prerequisite for the delimitation is the overlapping of entitlement. If states have the overlapping entitlement, so states need to make a delimitation. But if one of the states lose entitlement, so the other states do not have any incentive or kind of justification so to have delimitation. So this means that if we follow the newest decision by the ICJ, so from Japanese side, so Japan doesn't have any kind of a ground to have joint development zone in this area. So from a legal perspective, I guess that it's really tough for the Japanese government to maintain the current situation. But I don't know what would happen. And now I emphasize the kind of a legal development, but also I believe that the two states must consider the other two factors. So one factor is a kind of a geopolitical change. So in 1974, at that time, China was not as strong as at this time, right? So, but now, as you know, so China is a kind of superpower. So, so this point is some kind of a trilateral point. Actually, so China also claims the maritime areas in that part, some of this part. So it might be really important for Japan and ROK to share the view at least against China. So probably it would be a kind of a beneficial for the two states as far as I consider. And the second point is some kind of a change of the position of the fossil fuel, so especially for South Korea and Japan. And in the first session, so the speakers, panelists discussed to what extent so the states would use the fossil fuels. But at least both Japan and ROK are the member of the Paris Agreement, so they are expected to decrease the emission of GHG gas. And under that situation, so if the Japan and ROK so jointly develop oil and gas and consume those gases, so what would be the kind of implication for the international society? So probably that implication is totally different from that gave in 50 years before. So that aspect must be also considered. So, okay, so I will stop here, and so thank you for listening. Yep.
Thank you very much for a very thorough explanation about this agreement from a historical and legal perspective. Dr. Oh, I'd like to pose a similar question to you. What does this agreement mean for South Korea? You are one of the leading energy experts in Korea, so I want to hear your perspective specifically from the energy trade perspective. First, yours.
Hello, my name is Hong-ik Oh. I hope we can share diverse perspectives on the joint development zone as a foundation for cooperation. I will be shifting focus from legal aspects of JDZ to examine how our approaches shape our future from a strategic point of view. This means transforming JDZ issue from a zero-sum game into a win-win scenario. First of all, maintaining cooperation in JDZ is valid even from Japan's perspective, which questions its economic viability, as he mentioned. This is because sharing high-risk investment through joint venture is a common practice in oil industry. Of course, it also aligns with the fundamental spirit of this agreement between Korea and Japan. Furthermore, having self-developed oil and gas in nearby region for Korea and Japan, whose oil and gas production is negligible, can act as leverage to mitigate the unfair economic burden known as the Asia premium. This PowerPoint, secondly, continuing cooperation in the JDZ can create a positive atmosphere for security cooperation between Korea, Japan, and the United States. This is important for Japan, which finds security cooperation with Korea increasingly significant. According to Nikkei report of June 2024, China aims to access the East Sea through the Tumen River. The Tumen River actually is not only an economic lifeline for northeastern province of China, but can also be developed as for military purpose of Chinese Navy. Japan will do to counter the threat of Chinese Navy from East China Sea and East Sea. With the U.S. struggling to maintain sufficient naval presence and even requesting assistance from South Korean shipbuilding companies, cooperation with Korea is essential. However, due to issues such as Japan's release of wastewater from nuclear power plant and Japan's uncooperative stance on the UNESCO World Heritage listing of Hashima Island and Sado Mine, the Korean public does not see a mutually beneficial relationship between Korea and Japan. In this situation, if cooperation in the JDZ ends in 2028, as he mentioned, despite Japan's inaction since 2010, anti-Japanese sentiment will increase. The Korean government could lose the momentum to pursue trilateral security cooperation. It is worth noting that the UK and Norway, both NATO member in 1965, reached a grand compromise on the delimitation of the North Sea continental shelf boundary, ignoring the characteristics of maritime geology. As you see, the stopping of cooperation in the JDZ between Korea and Japan will weaken the security cooperation between Korea, Japan, and the United States, and strengthen China's influence. This also will negatively impact the export of the U.S. shale gas to the region, to Northeast Asia, which accounts for nearly half of global LNG demand, and is a battleground between U.S. shale gas and Russian pipeline gas. With the sanction on Russia, forcing it to rely solely on the export to China, China will seek to include Korea as a partner buyer of Russian pipeline gas. If this happens, the currently challenging power of Siberia 2 from Yamal Peninsula to China, this deal will be established, and affordable Yamal LNG, Yamal natural gas, will be supplied to Northeast Asia. The pipeline connection between China, Korea, Japan will be a matter of time, and U.S. shale gas could lose its market in the region. From the perspective of interest of U.S. shale gas companies, the United States need to play a constructive role to prevent the failure of JDZ cooperation. The United States already successfully mediated the maritime boundary delimitation between Israel and Lebanon, which have been historically hostile to the satisfaction of both parties in 2022. So the role of U.S. is hopeful. We have much work to do. Various scenarios await us in the dialogue between the United States and North Korea, such as the potential discussions on the construction of LNG power plant alongside the development of coastal resort area in North Korea, such as Wonsan Bay, and the participation of American companies in the offshore oil development in North Korea's Yellow Sea. I hope we wisely navigate the geopolitics energy in Northeast Asia, including the JDZ. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Oh, for explaining all this very complex geopolitics in the region. So, as you can tell, hearing from them, you can see how complex this issue is. And I would like to ask Congressman your thoughts on what this agreement means for the United States. Is there any role the United States can play thinking about enhancing trilateral cooperation going forward?
Great. So that was a great explanation of a very niche, complicated issue. Here's why it matters to the United States. I think, and it is something that we've actually talked, during the Biden administration, talked to both the Japanese and the Koreans as well as the Biden administration. Now, they didn't move on it, but here's, again, my perspective as one member of Congress, but I think why we should be paying attention to this and why there might be opportunity with the Trump administration. One, Professor, as you indicated, Japan theoretically could just let this expire in 2028 and lay claim to this region, which is, it would not fracture the relationship between, but it would make it more complicated, the relationship between Korea and Japan, if Japan were to pull out of this. The second, you talked about UNCLOS, and I think about this in the context of how China operated in the South China Sea with regards to construction of islands and so forth, disregarding some of the well-understood norms. There's nothing that would prevent China from, operating the same way, especially as they're starting to make some claims. President Trump has, talked about unleashing energy, oil and gas, in a way that is very different than the Biden administration. From our perspective, I think it would make sense for, again, Professor, you talked about, as Japan looked at this, it's technically difficult to get to these energy reserves, but U.S. oil companies are very good at doing this, and we've done that before. Is there the ability to negotiate a deal between Korea, Japan, the U.S. oil industry, even just to start doing some exploration? From my perspective, those initial steps, China will view as provocative, because again, I think China will say, well, that's our area. That's not, why is the U.S. here? But much as we were late to the game in the South China Sea, I don't think we can be late to the game in the JDZ area. We already see China making claims on Senkaku Islands and so forth. I think we can anticipate that they will do that. I think it gets more complicated if China were to actually just start exploring, right? Which I would not be surprised if they just started exploring and dared dared Korea or Japan to say, hey, wait a minute, this is our claimed area. So I think there is some urgency, and I think this is one area where it probably is easier to negotiate with the Trump administration because of the Trump administration's approach to oil and gas. So it may not, I think the initial step of a trilateral partnership to do exploration lays a marker in the area that then, again, China will view it as provocative, but it becomes much more difficult for China to come and say, okay, well, we're going to start exploring. I think if they started exploring, it would be very difficult for Japan and Korea. They would find themselves in a difficult situation. So I think there is some urgency to this, and I think that's how I'm thinking about it. But I think with the Trump administration and how they approach it, there's probably more opportunity than there was with the Biden administration.
That's a very good insight to this. Professor Seta or Dr. Oh, do you have any thoughts to this? Like from your perspective, what are the policy recommendations as to how your governments or any other three countries can do to, prevent some potential issues that could affect the trilateral, bilateral relations as well as trilateral cooperation going forward?
Okay, so thank you very much. And so first of all, I have to confess that my expertise is only the legal one, and so I'm not so familiar with the diplomacy or some kind of energy policy or commercial or those kind of things. But based on some kind of from the legal perspective, so there are three options for the two states. So the first option is maintain status quo. So if both of them do not unilaterally terminate the agreement, okay, so the situation continues. And the other one is, okay, so one of them, so probably, might be, so okay, so Japan might have some kind of a potential to terminate the agreement unilaterally. And without having new regime. So that means that there's some kind of a legal vacuum would appear. And probably this is a worst scenario for the two states. So because as you mentioned, so now that if we see the situation of South China Sea, so what would happen in the East South China Sea, we can easily imagine it. And as I also emphasized in my explanation, that now both Japan and ROK cannot compete with China, so by individually. So on that point, of course, two states cooperation, and if they successfully include the United States, so that would be much more attractive. So it's quite obvious. So on that point, but the third option that is, so okay, two states make a new kind of a regime for, it's considering some kind of so the claim by China or how to compete with China. So there are the three kind of option. And as I said, so probably for the Japanese government, the third option would be the more desirable compared to the first option. But I'm not sure, but the Korean government might prefer to the first option. So, of course, both of them have some kind of pro and con. And so it's also really nice that if the U.S. companies participate in the exploration activities, so that would be some kind of a good, how should I say, kind of appeal for the three states cooperation. But the problem is that, as far as I remember, though, once the South Korea gave some kind of designate foreign company as a concessionaire. As far as I remember, probably U.S. company was included. No, sorry, I don't remember well. So finally, so they decided to withdraw from the project. So I'm not sure I have to confess that I'm not expert on that issue either. But so to what extent the commercial feasibility? So that is a point where the Japan and ROK have some kind of a disagreement on it. So, if we consider that, okay, so two states, two governments have some kind of a disagreement on that point, so why not asking the third party, United States, to join and also, okay, so calculate, evaluate the resources deposit and so to consider again. So that would be a good first step. Yeah, I agree with that point. Yeah, so that is my answer and point. So thank you very much.
Following Representative Amy Barrett's comment on the possibility of American companies to be involved in the offshore oil development in this area, the recently Japanese government revised the law. Previously, only Japanese companies involved can develop the offshore oil. But now, if American companies have local office, you can do it. So there is some opportunities. And one of the reasons I oppose the termination of the agreement in 2028 is that once it's terminated, the East China Sea will be a battlefield among all near neighboring countries. And the flashpoint is Senkaku Island, because the island is a base of EEZ. Problem is, once the issue of the ownership of Senkaku Island appear, have you think about how Taiwanese people think about the issue? Will they support Japan's stance? You know, you can guess. Those kind of complex issues is difficult to be dealt with by Japan. So I think maintaining the JDZ cooperation and try to find more practical a way to develop oil and gas. And he mentioned that oil is okay. For that question, currently CNOOC, Chinese oil company, produce 30,000 BOE per day, and 80% of the production is natural gas, relatively clean energy source. So don't worry about that. Thank you.
So I agree. I think allowing the agreement to terminate in 2028, I really would guess that the Chinese companies would move in and the Chinese government would move in. We already see them challenging the EEZ and challenging where the Senkaku Islands are. And we've pushed back, obviously, with Japan. I think the importance of involving U.S. Companies is because now we're in the game with Japan and Korea, if we have a presence there. And again, right now the law's pretty well established. And again, I even think if there's just an extension, but there's no exploration, no presence there, China will just disregard that and say, well, wait a minute, that no longer, this is actually our EEZ, and we're going to drill here. So it doesn't have to be a full-scale development, but I think a presence and something that starts before 2028, sooner than later, will make it very much more difficult for China to engage. And I do agree that, you know, again, the importance of the U.S. companies being there is it pulls us into the game with our allies, Korea and Japan, and it becomes much harder for China to bully either Japan or Korea. But I think it would be difficult for either country to do this by themselves, given how aggressive we've seen China in the region.
I feel like I really learned a lot from these panels today. So unless you guys, any of you have any further questions, I'd like to take some questions from the audience, if that's okay. Okay. So we have some couple of minutes left. So I'd like to take some questions from the floor. Anybody who wants to pose questions to our speakers, please raise your hand. And please identify yourself before you pose questions. Minji, Sid has some questions.
It's a relatively quick question. And that is the U.S. company interest hypothetical? Are you assuming it, or are you highly confident that these U.S. companies would be attracted to the prospect?
I've not had any conversations with U.S. companies. We didn't get that far with the Biden administration. I've only thought it from a geopolitical strategic perspective of the importance of U.S. companies being engaged. I'm not an oil man, and hypothetically, I don't know what the potential there is. But even, I think just having a presence there and doing some exploration and doing some assessment establishes that this is in China's territory.
Regarding your question, I'd like to mention that this time is different from time of Nixon, President Nixon. During 1970s, the U.S. tried to contact China to have a good, to have diplomatic relation. For that, U.S. government withdraw the protection for your companies, for U.S. companies, because Nixon administration didn't want to make some noise vis-a-vis China. But now is different. So there could be some possibility of U.S. companies joining the development in JDG. Thank you.
Gentleman over there.
Hi, this is Yoon-ho Lee from Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology, KIOST. I'd like to point out a couple of unagreeable points from the presentation of Professor Makano Seta, especially regarding the map. May I have the map Professor Seta presented?
I don't have any authority, so that would you show my map?
Yeah. The first of all, the midline claimed by Japan within the JDZ, the north west side, there is a kind of dispute zone. Yeah, this is kind of a fact check based on the scientific basis. So this line, this is the Japan's claimed line, but the Korea claims the midline goes like this way. So there is a dispute zone here, which is now in Korea, we call Jeju Rise overlapping zone. So the midline, this is not the fixed line. That's one thing. And then about this area, from this pelagic open ocean, 200 nautical mile goes up to here. But the Commission on the Limit of the Continental Shelf, the committee under United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, they define the seafloor differently. So they allow extended continental shelf under the seafloor. So based on that principle, the seafloor claims by Korea can extend up to this line. So this is not, there is some different claims about these lines. And the second thing, this is not a scientific one, but this is the fact. Just below here, the China is operating oil well. So it tells that there is a significant amount of oil and gas resources just below here. So we can easily imagine that the oil resources can go over this JDG zone. So there could be some rich resources there. So we need to explore the possibility. Yeah, I'd like to emphasize the importance of the trilateral collaboration among Korea, Japan, and US. My institute, KIOST, has been actively involved in the ocean environmental surveys within a small portion of the JDG. I mentioned the Jeju Rise overlapping zone. That's the Korea claims it's the kind of within the Korea exclusive economic zone. So in light of this, I'd like to raise a question. Is it possible for Korea and Japan to initiate immediately a joint oceanographic survey across the entire JDG area as the first step towards energy cooperation in this agreed zone. Additionally, the U.S. would be welcome to participate in this joint survey as an observer or an advisor, providing support in moderating any potential conflict between Korea and Japan during this cooperative process. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so can I use also the pointer? Okay, so first of all, I also I admit that I put the letter, but I didn't explain. So this median line is a median line claimed by Japan. So it's true that this line is drawn by Japan unilaterally, and China always also said that the median line unilaterally drawn by Japan, and it's true. So on that point, okay, so yeah, it's true that South Korea has defined points, but your second argument is not that doesn't matter. So because I also, and of course I understand that CSIS has authority to admit the a continental shelf beyond 200 nautical mile. So on that point, yeah, it's true that so South Korea may have entitlement beyond 200 nautical mile based on the maritime feature of the seabed feature. But as I explained, so based on the newest judgment of the ICJ, so actually, yeah, not newest anymore, but 2 years ago, so 2023 judgment, so the distance is prior to natural prolongation. So if that, so the entitlement of South Korea continental shelf is beyond 200 nautical miles and within 200 nautical miles from Japanese side, so South Korea cannot have entitlement. So this is the point which I emphasize. So on that point, yeah, irrespective of and actually CSIS hasn't made any recommendation on that region so far. So on that point, if we follow the judgment of the ICJ, so the South Korea may not claim entitlement here. So as far as I understand, so that is a point. Sorry, and also. If I misunderstood, I'm sorry, but as far as I understand, the Chinese activity for oil and gas are conducted around here and not like here. So because here, so Japan and China also have a designated joint development zone. But as far as I understand, so the Chinese activities are rather southern part of the East China Sea, as far as I understand. But if China conducted, develop oil and gas from here, so I'm sorry for it. But as far as I understand, so the more southern part. But anyway, so I have to check it. So thank you for your point. And with regard to your question, so I think that it's really difficult for the Japanese government to start the joint exploration immediately under the existing frameworks because so first of all, as I said, so no Japanese company raised their hands for exploration because probably most of or all of them might have already given up for finding the oil and gas in that region. So from that perspective, it's quite difficult for the government to start a joint exploration immediately. So some kind of a persuasion or negotiation or those kind of things are needed. So that is one of the problem. Not one, so probably the biggest problem for the joint development. Yeah, and in any event, so thank you very much for your question and point.
I'd like to add 2 points. One is that there is a Chinese developed oil well called Longjing near JDZ.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And about the economic viability, the issue is that Japan said it's not economically viable. And then no explanation. Why? It's still just argument of Japan's side. If the one thing I'd like to say to both government is that to have sincere conversation or dialogue about this JDZ cooperation. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions from the floor? Okay. Since I really, listening to all three of you, I just felt a number of things. First, this agreement has really complex. There's a lot of things that I think both Japan, Korea, and also U.S. government really need to sit down and talk about this before things become much more complex and becomes possible territory issues, which we do not want to see in the East China Sea, which is already has a lot of issues going on there. But secondly, as Congressman Barra mentioned, since you said that there is an ongoing trilateral dialogue among the legislative dialogue, I think this is something that hopefully you can actually start having initiative and then talk about your colleagues, try to make sure that this doesn't really explode in the trilateral context. So that's my 10 cents there.
We have had some of those conversations with our counterparts in Japan and Korea. Again, I think this is one of those areas where it may be easier to get traction under the Trump administration than it was with the Biden administration because of President Trump's focus on energy. And I think it is a reasonable first step to just do some exploration, to get a sense of, what are the resources there. And I think, again, the urgency from my perspective is if we don't move, I would very much expect China to continue to encroach.
So with that, I would like to conclude the second session. I would like to thank Congressman Barra, Professor Seta, and then Dr. Oh for your time and participation. Really appreciate this. Has been really helpful to all of us. Thank you.